Lately, I've been interested in getting a film look on a lot of my footage, but film is so expensive. This Super 8 camera used to belong to my grandpa. He shot a lot of my dad's childhood on it. This footage from the 60s is of my dad and his siblings at Disneyland. He gave me this camera a couple of years ago, but I've only shot one roll on it. One roll. The hassle you have to go through of getting actual film and then shooting it and sending it back and getting it digitized, and the expense of that makes it difficult to justify if you're just wanting to play around with it. So I found a couple ways to make my digital footage look like film, and I wanted to give you a couple tips on how I'm doing it. I want to break this into two categories. There's the way that you shoot it, and there's the way that you edit it. And I think knowing what you're doing in each one is really helpful for the other. How I shoot the footage. The first thing I do if I know I want my footage to look like film is turn off autofocus. If I can see the camera hunting for focus, that immediately takes me out of it, no matter how good any other part of this looks. I think you might be surprised what you can get away with in terms of focus if it looks like it's on film. One thing I've done to take it just a step further is use lenses that were built for film cameras. So I have this Helios lens, which is a lens from the Soviets from like the 60s or something. And it's known for this swirly bokeh that it has. And I think the reason that this looks so good is because when we're going from digital footage to film footage, really what we're doing is adding a bunch of flaws and characteristics that make it look like things I had to deal with if I had been shooting on film. So technically, these lenses are much less precise than the modern lenses, and that's what sets it apart to look more like film. The next thing I do, which is completely preference, so do whatever you want, but I like to lock the camera off and have the camera do no movement other than maybe push in or a zoom. To me, I think the more subtle you can make the movements, the more it feels like back in the day when you just set the camera up and then you clicked the button. Maybe it doesn't make total sense, but it is the style I like. The next thing is framing. This is something that kind of blends into editing, but you really want to be aware of it when you're shooting. If I'm shooting something that I want to look like film, I'm probably going to frame it into a square aspect ratio or a 3:4 aspect ratio. So if that's the case, I want to be aware when I'm shooting that I'm putting things into the frame in a way that I can crop out the edges and it will still look good. So this leads us straight into the editing aspect of making your footage look like film. I both really like just cropping down the image so that you have a clean edge for your square format or your 3:4, but I also really do like, sometimes, if it's a good one, a film mat that goes around your footage and gives a little bit more of a sense like you're watching it as it's being projected. I think the color and the film grain is the biggest step. For a long time, I've been just upping the contrast, crushing the blacks, and then putting like some sort of film grain that I found online and just using the screen blend mode to put it over it. And it does a pretty good job, but it's very difficult to emulate any sort of specific film look. And it can be difficult to get a consistent look every time if you're manually playing with the colors each time. So I actually started using a plugin called Dehancer. Dehancer's a plugin that goes straight into Premiere, so I can apply the effect onto my footage as if it's just any other effect from the effects panel. For a lifetime license to Dehancer for Premiere and After Effects, it's like $400. So I had been contemplating buying it because that is a little pricey for a plugin like that, but my friend had told me that it was really, really good. So I was actually getting ready to pull the trigger when they reached out to me and asked if I would review their product. So disclaimer that they are giving me a license for me to talk about it, but it is something I was about to buy and that since using, I am a really big fan of. Like I said, I've used a lot of film overlays and I've used different mats, and some of those I've bought online. And what I really like about Dehancer is that it supplies you with everything you need in this plugin. So not only does it have different film stocks that you can emulate, grain, halation, gate weave, film breadth. It has a ton of options that have let me learn a bit about how I can make my own footage look more like film. And it's taught me a lot about the actual film process. So I view it as dually beneficial. One is that I do get to make my footage look like film, and one is that I actually get to learn which film stocks I like and which film effects I like. And you can turn any of these effects on or off throughout the process. So if you do want film grain, but you don't want halation, you can just check the enable box. Or if you just want the color, you can uncheck every box but the color. The thing that's very appealing to me about Dehancer is that I can choose which camera I shot on. I can choose the picture profile and exactly the settings, the gamut, everything that I shot in, and then tell it which film stock I want it to emulate. And it will convert specifically from the way I shot it to that film stock. So you're getting way more than just a LUT that you slap on top of the footage. So I went camping with a friend to get some footage that I thought would be fitting for the Dehancer plugin, and this is the result. The one critique I have of Dehancer is that it can be pretty heavy on your computer in your software. So I definitely wouldn't recommend putting it on before editing. And if you're adding grain and you're adding halation and you're adding gate weave and film breath, then it can get really heavy really fast, and the playback is pretty poor and the export times are pretty long. But that is the sacrifice you make for a high quality output. One thing I want to point out that I didn't know much about before playing with this that I learned from Dehancer is about film breath. And what that means is the exposure jumps between frames. Outside of Dehancer, one of the editing things I do is lean into this a little bit more, and I put an adjustment layer on the top of what I'm editing. And between cuts, I like to do just like 2 or 3 frames that really ramp up in exposure and then come back down. The reason I do this is because if you're shooting on like an old film camera, when you stop rolling, the shutter is slowing down and it leaves them to be exposed for a bit longer. And then when you start up again, it does the exact same thing to the next few frames. So by making the exposure spike between cuts, I think it smooths out those transitions a little bit and just reminds you that you're watching something on film. I've always thought one of the best ways to make a really compelling video or to get really compelling footage is to have a large variety of it. And I think having the ability to add the film look into that variety is actually a really powerful tool to have in your tool set. Whether or not it's Dehancer, I think using film for like wedding videos and mixing that with really crisp digital footage makes the sharp images look sharper. If you are interested in getting Dehancer, you can get 10% off any of the licenses by using my name, Daniel, when you check out. And I do get a little kickback because it's an affiliate link. But if you're not interested in doing that, I still hope that this has been helpful, and I would love to hear the way you make your footage look like film and what you take from this video in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please give this a like, and I'll see you in another video super soon. Peace.